The Marketing Legends video series is made possible through the generous support of the Sheth Foundation. The Sheth Foundation is a not-for-profit organization whose mission is to develop and recognize scholars and scholarship in marketing globally and further the development of marketing thought.
Welcome to the American Marketing Association's Marketing Legends series. I'm Richard Lutz, and I will serve as today's host. The Marketing Legends program is designed to honor exceptional marketers and create a repository of educational content to inspire students, scholars, and managers. Today, I'm speaking with Bart Weitz. Bart, thank you for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure, Rich.
Your complete academic biography is being shared as a companion to this interview, but why don't you provide a snapshot of your early career? Tell us how an engineer from MIT became a retailing authority.
Great. I'm really excited to be here, and maybe I'll just go back to when I was very young. At least it seems young now. I've always been very interested in how things work and how to make them work better. And in fact, to give you an example, when I was in 5th grade, I built a project around the Hoover Dam. I'd never seen the Hoover Dam, but I built this model that sort of worked. And what it demonstrated were the challenges from an engineering point of view of building the dam and how the engineers overcame these impediments. And I also did projects on the science fairs in high school. And I was really slotted for I was kind of directed into a career in the sciences. I got good grades in math courses and science courses. I liked those courses. My parents, none of my family had ever gone to college. I was the first person who went to college. But my father made a pretty good living. We lived in an upper middle class community, and the high school was very proud of the fact that it placed a lot of students in Ivy League schools. So they were very excited about me going to MIT when I was accepted. And MIT was really a perfect place for me, for an engineering student. The people there were very smart, very competitive, just like they are now. And I remember this one course I took that I just loved, because what they did is they got a grant from the Ford Foundation to develop this course where every week the instructors would make up a problem set. And the problem set would actually be a string of things you had to answer, problems you had to solve. And by the time you had solved all those problems, you came up with something that was very useful or was some big theme, it was either very useful or it was some finding or theory that you had built up from scratch. I went to MIT for 4 years, and then I went to look for a job. And I had a lot of really good companies that wanted to hire me to be in the design part of their company. Trying to do new things and develop new products. But this guy from Lockheed kept on calling me up every day and telling me how he was driving with his top down into work and how the sun was coming out and all that. And I really loved that. So at the end, he convinced me to go with Lockheed rather than IBM, DEC. I don't think DEC's a company anymore. Digital Equipment it was called. And, or some other companies that gave me offers. And I really went there for the California life experience in the 60s. And I went there just because I thought I'd have a lot of fun, and they also offered me the most money. And then I graduated from MIT, and when I graduated, that just describes where I went to after I graduated from MIT. And I drove out to California, bought a sports car, of course, and tooled around in my convertible. But after a couple of years, I realized that I didn't really like engineering as much as I thought I would. First of all, there weren't any projects, one every week, like I experienced with 601. You're stuck on one project and you're stuck there a long time. And so there was this variety of things to work on. And also you're sort of isolated. If you're in design, you're sort of sitting over a computer trying to make this problem work. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to switch over into marketing, because I had met a lot of marketing people at companies and during my stay at Lockheed. And Lockheed was particularly bad because the job really was a management job. I mean, it really. I worked on the Polaris missile instrumentation, and all I was doing was going around having forms checked off by different people, and it wasn't really that interesting. And so when I was talking with people that you'd meet at the bar, marketing sounded really like it was going to be a great thing. And I liked being with people. I didn't like actually having a job where you sort of sat alone. And so I went back. I got an MBA at Stanford. And then I went to work for two. Notice all this happened in Silicon Valley, which really wasn't Silicon Valley then, but I like to say that I worked there. So I went to work for two small electronics companies after getting an MBA. And they only had a couple of people in marketing. And I eventually became the marketing director of one. But I recognized that being in marketing for these high-tech companies, there's really a problem. First of all, they don't listen to you. And unless you're one of the founders, which is usually around the technology, you don't get cut in on the big money when the company sort of makes it. And then something happened. And what happened is I got into a bad accident. And I was left paralyzed, and I'm in a wheelchair. But actually, it's funny. My mother, on this wheelchair, my mother always, it didn't bother me that much. It was like a new challenge to me. And my mother always, until she died, she always kept on saying that I was going to crack up one day when all this hit me, that I was confined to a wheelchair. But it still hasn't happened. I'm not crazy yet. So, but I was confined to a wheelchair. I spent 3 months in rehabilitation. The company I worked for was very nice to me. But one of the problems was when you're the head of marketing for a small company, in this type of technology we had, you're really the best salesperson. And so what you do is, what I was doing is I was traveling a lot. I was going to 5 cities in 5 days every other week, and I couldn't do that when I was in a wheelchair. And so I had a lot of experience sort of dealing in sales situations and a lot of experience in this kind of technology. But I had the resources. I really didn't have the resources because I could either work for a big company like GE, but they would give me a staff job. I'd be sort of like in market research, or I could work for a company. The alternative is to work for a small company that would have me traveling all around making sales. And so what I did is I just kept on trying to collect information. And so what I did what I did at first was to, I read books, and then one day I was actually sitting on the John, and I read Business Week, and then somebody talked about the new dean they had there. And I said, well, maybe I could be a professor. Now, at this time, I was 31 years old. And I said, well, you know, I'm going to call some people up. So I started to call up professors at big schools. I mean, I knew that MIT, Harvard, Stanford were, you know, great places to be at. And I started to call all these professors who I've later met in life, but don't remember these instances. And I remember this conversation I had with George Day at Stanford. He was amazed because I would ask him questions like flat out, how much am I going to make if I'm good? And how much can I make? And I learned all the things that that are sort of no-nos. Like I understood, they explained to me that the stuff we do is very theoretical. It's not really related to the practical things you knew when you were a salesperson or when you were the head of marketing for this company. And then I thought, well, how do I get letters from people? Because I don't know any professors. He told me he had to have letters from great professors. So I said, I don't know anybody. So what I did is I got letters from all the people that I used to work with who were vice presidents and presidents of companies and had them, and I said, now write me a recommendation letter, but don't write it that say anything about my experience as a business person or my experience as a marketing manager. Talk about how I'm very good at developing theories, and I had these guys write letters. I wrote the letters sometimes to sort of explain how I would be a good academic, because George Day also explained to me that I was older than the normal person applying for a PhD program, and so then I graduated from. So then I decided to go to a PhD program. I was accepted at all of the big schools, and then I decided on Stanford because I had been there. It's easy to get around in a wheelchair. The weather's great, and I sort of specialized in marketing. And and the thing I liked about marketing was that the engineering, you seem to be able to do different things and have different kind of challenges. And I like the idea of working together with other people in other functional areas and things like that. And I had a good time at getting an MBA at Stanford. And then when I went around to get a job, I also had a lot of good offers, and I had learned by that time the right language to speak with, and which I still know. One of the places I went to interview was Rich Lutz was one of the people interviewing me at UCLA at that time.
I remember that. I met you when you were a doctoral student at Stanford, and then a couple of years later, you were on the job market. Was there a key moment or pivotal person anywhere along the line that really influenced your academic career?
You know, there really isn't a pivotal person, but a pivotal experience, I think, was I took the job at UCLA, and I thought that really changed my perspective on everything. I mean, the people there were terrific. Rich is an example of that, but also Jim Bettman and Halka Sargent. They read your papers, they give you feedback, they try to make things easy for you when you're a junior faculty member. They did all the right things. We went out for beer on Friday with the doctoral students. We had some very bright doctoral students, and we had a dean that was interested in funding the doctoral program. So I think that and they really taught me the ins and outs of doing research. The sort of little things that come up. I mean, one of the funniest, not funny, but like, I'll give you an example of this. This is just a little thing. But I did this paper with Jim Bettman. And we sent it in, and we thought, of course, like you always do, that this is going to be automatically accepted without any revision. And Jim, and so I brought the paper. I got the letter, and I read it over, and then I took the letter. And it was fortunately revised and submitted. But I took the letter to Jim, and I said, how could these people that reviewed this say this? We say right in the article that that's not what we did. And he said, the job that we need to do is don't blame the reviewer. Blame yourself for not making it clear what you were saying. So we have to sort of look at these reviews and say, why would he say that? Why would the author say that? And that would tell us. And he sort of gave me a different perspective on this review process as not being adversarial, but being constructive. And there were a lot of things like that. We just had a great faculty. And but I wanted to take a step up in the world, and so after 7 years maybe there, or 5, I went to work at Wharton, and then University of Florida, who Rich by then had joined their faculty, called me up and made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And it was such a good offer in terms of the teaching load and the money that I accepted it. My wife told me that if I moved to Gainesville, we were living in Philadelphia then, if I moved to Gainesville, I could do anything I wanted to, but she wasn't coming. But she decided to come, and we've been very happy here in Gainesville.
Is there a particular piece of scholarship that you are particularly proud of?
I think there isn't sort of one article. I think the thing that I'm the proudest of is I wrote a series of papers, most of them with co-authors, about a construct that I developed. To sort of understand my research, I mean, it fits into this fact that I had this business experience. When I was a marketing manager, I went out with some really great salespeople. I mean, professional people that were in their 50s and 60s, and were selling $5 million worth of aerospace junk a year. I mean, they were just terrific salespeople. And I would sort of complement their presentation with my discussion of what our company was going to do and how it would help them and us if they decided to go to use our equipment. But one of the things that intrigued me was the fact that some of these salespeople weren't this normal 5 martinis, slap you on the back kind of guys. I mean, they were actually introverted, some of the best salespeople. And so I developed this idea that the best salespeople are adaptive. They have a complex cognitive structure of sales of customers. They know how to use different strategies with different customers. They've learned a lot, and through that knowledge, they've been very successful at influencing people. And they use different influence techniques on different people. And then I developed, I developed the concept. I developed some ideas about how adaptive selling might be measured. I looked at sort of the antecedents. What are the sort of characteristics that you had to be very flexible and adaptive? And I also did articles on the consequences to demonstrate that actually under certain circumstances, certain conditions, that people who were more adaptive were more successful. You know this, and then I used to, I can remember also, the real estate woman who sold our house to us was married to a guy who was a lineman at University of Florida. And he was a big, I don't know, he had moved up from being a lineman to being a wealthy businessman. And we had them over for dinner once, and people always ask you, when you're a professor, they ask you sort of, is the stock market going up or not? And what's the new thing? Well, I mean, it sort of embarrasses me when I tell them about my research, because in general, my research is so, research done by professors is fairly theoretical. And it's not as directly practical. And I remember making this comment with this guy, and telling him what I was doing, and tried to water it down so that he would understand it. And he understood it perfectly. And he said, I was a lineman. In fact, he turned out to be the first All-American at the University of Florida. And he said, I was a lineman. And he said, I'd do the same thing. I knew what position the different people were playing, and I knew what to do if the tackle that was opposite me went right, what I was going to do. If he went left, what I was going to do. And I could tell that if he put his hand down a certain way, he was going to go in a certain direction. And so this is sort of another example of this is people like Peyton Manning can. What makes them so successful? He doesn't have the strongest arm in the world. He's probably not the smartest guy in the world. But Peyton Manning knows defenses. And so he has an elaborate cognitive structure about the people he's playing against. That was a long answer to my one piece of research that...
well, as you said, it wasn't one piece. It was a whole program of research that led to the insights that you generated. So let's turn a bit now to your insights into practice. With competition from cyber behemoths like Amazon, what do you see the future of the brick and mortar store as being?
Oh, I should, before I answer that question, I should sort of say why I got into retailing. So I sort of left engineering, but it was kind of a shock to people that this chair that they hired me with at the University of Florida was given by JCPenney, and they hired me. One of the problems, Rich knows this, and I don't really because I wasn't there, but I think initially they didn't want to hire me because I was too practical, and I wasn't theoretical enough. And but of course the chair people who wanted to give us the money to fund it were more interested in practical things. Well, what I found out is that retailing actually offers a great opportunity to do research in a wide variety of areas. I mean, retailers are just like companies. I mean, they have salespeople that work for them. They have people that do advertising. They have HR people. They have product design people doing private label. They build brands. They do a lot of the same, and they're a lot easier to get a hold of than sort of industrial types. So now to get to what you asked the question about, I think people in general, the internet, buying stuff over the internet. First of all, everybody does it, and the other thing is that it's so it's very popular, and people have a big overestimate of what its impact really is, because most people, when it first came out, I mean, people were convinced that it would destroy stores because it was more convenient and lower price to buy it over the internet. It turns out it's not lower price because it typically costs more to sell stuff over the internet than it does over brick and mortar stores. And so people, it turns out that non-store retailers represents about 10 or 12% of the retail sales, which is similar to what it's been for the last couple of years. It grows a lot, but a lot of that growth is taken out by other non-store retailing formats, like catalog. It destroys catalogs. But there are a lot of people that still want to feel something before they buy it. There's food retailing is a huge part of the retail sales, and a lot of people don't want to buy food through. And there's also a tremendous problem in selling food, delivering food. It goes bad. It's got to be. You've got to be there to accept it and put it into the refrigerator. So I think, but what it does do is it provides another channel for customers, and I think the real trend of what's going to happen is that more companies are going to do both. And in fact, even Amazon is talking about opening up stores. So what's going to happen is you're going to have a retailer that provides you what do you want to buy with across all channels. I don't think that was a particularly good answer.
I don't think there are necessarily good answers in this environment. It's a very tricky one. But what advice would you have for a small or mid-sized retailer in this uncertain environment?
Well, I think it's the same thing as my reaction to, is Walmart going to take everybody out of business? Just to give you an idea, by the way, of this, returning to this size, everybody gets concerned. Everybody thinks that retailers should be very concerned about Amazon. The real one that could take over the world is Walmart. And Walmart is almost 7 times bigger than Amazon. And a lot of Amazon's sales are through, are sales for its technology, like its access to the cloud and the software that does that, and are not actually retail sales to end consumers. I wanted to sort of say that the Walmart success and the reaction of Walmart is very similar to the reaction that a small mid-sized retailer should have towards the internet. I think the critical thing with any businesses, but particularly small retailers, is to do something distinctive, to develop your own brands, to do something that a competitor can't copy easily. And so you have to be, you can't just do the same thing and think you can do it cheaper. Nobody can do it cheaper than Walmart. And so if you're small and or medium sized, you've got to develop a selling proposition that is communicated to customers that makes you stand out.
It's probably going to revolve more around service than physical product, right?
Right, because the services are much harder to provide, where physical product, you know, if you want to sell something to Macy's, if you want to, like with the physical product, if you're a small retailer that is just selling on price against Macy's or against Walmart, Walmart is eventually going to beat you. I mean, they've just got more scale than you've got. So you've got to come up with something different, and that's what I think the trick is.
Throughout your career, you've traversed the boundaries of academe and practice with ease. What advice do you have for emerging scholars who would like to work with industry?
I think it's, you really have to develop, I think it's tough. That's what makes business-to-business marketing much more difficult to publish in my mind, than consumer behavior. Because in business-to-business marketing, if you do stuff that's data-driven, it's hard to get data. And so what you have to do is you have to develop relationships with some company where you'd be doing the research not to make money or consulting, but as a way of getting data to purchase, data to do studies and prove your propositions. And the way to do that is you've got to develop contacts. And then you say, well, it's just a sales job. You've got to go to places where you can meet business people, like going to the AMA meetings, and you can start talking to them and try to come up with a research idea that you have that will benefit them. And then you need to write sort of a proposal sometimes. You need to write up a proposal that says what you're doing, where you're emphasizing what they can get out of it and what their benefit is. You don't want to just sort of say it's something to help you. And then you have to do a good job, follow up at the end by making a presentation to their management about what you've done. And then hopefully you can continue to do research with that company. Some people in academia have done a wonderful job of that. And a lot of times that's because they've worked for the company before they went to get a PhD. But I think that it's hard, but it also has a big payoff because there's not very much of that stuff being done.
Bart, you've spoken in the past about the importance of sales taking more of a relational approach rather than a straightforward transactional approach. And that's shown up in some of your research. Can you talk about that a bit?
Well, I think that that's the wave of the future. The wave of the future is to develop unique products or unique services by merging together and working with another company on them and having them bring their knowledge, you bring your knowledge to the table, you have some people put it together and sort of get a synergistic effect that's very difficult to compete away. And so I think a lot of research is being done now on this idea of building these relational orientation, this orientation towards maximizing the benefit of a deal to the both parties rather than just one party. And how do you set those up is being done more and more by companies. And I think it's sort of interesting because in our political environment now, the people in the government are interested in transactional relationships. They're going just the opposite of the way that academics view the future of retail, the future of relationships between companies, or relationships between consumers and brands, or the relationship between sales managers and salespeople, or the relationships between salespeople and customers. But to try to build these long-term relationships, which gives you a fairly sustainable competitive advantage, and it's just what our present government is doing is it's emphasizing transactional relationships. In other words, it wants to have everything go into a world where you're always competing against some other company. You win a contract is awarded on a bid. You have no relationship with the person who sold you the stuff before or after the transaction. You just get that one transaction completed, and you go on to another transaction. There's no carryover between transactions, and I think that's most researchers feel that that's not the right approach to take, and it'll be interesting to see how that works in a political environment versus a business environment.
Right. So before we close, I want to ask you something completely different. So thinking back to when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, when I was really young, I wanted to be a fireman. But when I got a little bit older, I wanted to be a baseball player.
What position?
Well, I was so crummy that I was a second baseman. The other crummy position you get is outfielder. Right fielder.
When I did my interview, my answer was second baseman for the St. Louis Cardinals. For you, it was the Cleveland Indians, probably, right?
Right. I remember the days of the Cleveland Indians.
Bart, on behalf of the AMA, thank you for sharing your time and insights. On behalf of the American Marketing Association, I'm Richard Lutz. Thank you.